Please be advised that Little Miss Recap contains adult language. Welcome to Little Miss Recap. My name's Amy Archer, and this is a show with just me, no co-host, flying solo, telling you about a show I love. Think of it like a dollar store version of Oprah's Favorite Things. This show that I'm going to talk to you about today is Cold Case Files. I love Cold Case Files. It's on Netflix. There's 2 seasons. I think it aired somewhere else originally because season 2 has like 95 episodes, and that can't be right. Either way, I love a good cold case, especially and only when it is solved. So let's take a listen. Hi, everyone. Today I'm here to talk to you about Cold Case Files, Season 2, Episode 25, The Lost Patient. So this is the story of Janie. She is developmentally impaired, and she's 18 years old, and she goes missing from Fairview, which is a mental health facility in Oregon in the 70s. Joyce Caldwell is Janie's sister, and she tells us there were 5 siblings in the family. Janie was the second oldest, and Joyce was the 4th, but they were very close, and they were inseparable as children. Janie is developmentally impaired, according to her sister, and the schools pick up on this at first. They notice that she has a really hard time sitting still, she's easily upset, she's reactionary. She'd even been known to run away sometimes. But Joyce tells us as much as Janie used to run away, she would always come back. Then when she was 7, she went to Fairview, and this was based on the school and a doctor's recommendation. Her parents just really wanted her to have the best care, and they did not know how to provide that for her. Now, you have to understand, if you're younger and you're listening to this, this was very common in the 60s, 70s, even 80s, even 90s, where families would have a family member who needed additional care, and if they couldn't provide it, they would either institutionalize the child or even put them up for adoption in some cases. So the sisters stayed close, but it devastated Joyce to have Janie gone. And the way that they stayed close is through some phone calls, but they also wrote letters back and forth. The family lived far enough from Fairview that it was hard for them to see her a lot. So eventually, Janie becomes a ward of the state, and she lives at Fairview. Steve Hinkle is the detective, and he tells us what happened to Janie. So the original investigators get a call that an 18-year-old girl has walked away from the Oregon facility. Her full name at this time is Janie Landers. She was last seen in her classroom and had spoken with her counselor, Bill Graff. Bill Graff was like her personal psychologist that worked with her. Soon after that happened, she leaves class and she is seen walking towards her cottage, but she never makes it there. This was at 2 o'clock. That becomes important. On March 9th, 1979, Joyce's family learns that Janie has gone missing. And at Fairview, people are searching all around the grounds looking for her, thinking she may have wandered off, she might be lost, she might be hurt somewhere. There's a pretty big search. 5 days later, on March 14th, 1979, Janie's body is found in a field right off of a highway. What they discover is that she was stabbed. There is signs of a struggle that she fought for her life, but she was definitely murdered somewhere else and dumped here in this field because there's no signs of the grounds being disturbed or a struggle happening at that location. From the autopsy, they're able to determine that she was killed pretty close to the time that she was last seen because of the undigested food in her belly. They determined that she had died from blunt force trauma. And the detectives at the time, even though it's 1979, they do a really good job of collecting good evidence. They collect blood, they collect hair, they collect 4 hairs that were clutched in Janie's fist, and they preserve this all really well. They also discovered that she was not sexually assaulted. So now I'm going to take you through the initial investigation. So immediately after Janie goes missing, Leona, a staff member, reports that she was arriving at work on March 9th when she saw a girl she recognized. She could not name Janie personally, but she knew that this girl had been a resident of Fairview. She recognized her. She was on the road, and there was a car parked on the shoulder. And there was a man walking from the car approaching Janie. It was really suspicious, but Leona just drives right on past it. And she does say, like, I really struggled with this because I wanted to pick her up. I sensed something wasn't right. But there were very strict rules about staff members fraternizing with patients. And she was afraid she would get in trouble. But she does run up to Fairview and she calls security. Security immediately goes down. They check the location. There's nothing there. What they do get from Leona, though, is a good description of this guy. He was wearing a t-shirt and jeans. He was 35 to 40, 5'8" to 5'10". He had a big pot belly, and he drove a gold sedan 4-door car. They were even able to get enough detail to create a sketch of him. What the investigators do at this point is they start interviewing people who saw Janie last. And the first person they interview is her counselor, Bill Graff. And Bill Graff is still alive and is like the sweetest little old man ever. And he even says, if you look at a picture of me from that time, I fit that description. He says Janie had the cognitive abilities of a 9-year-old, but she was very loving and very kind. And he said she had many other life skills, like she could clean up after herself. She could, keep her room tidy. She could do all of those sorts of things. He eventually passes a polygraph test and is ruled out. What they do learn from Bill Graff, however, is that Janie and another woman named Cheryl had a crazy fight. Apparently, they were in a kitchen of some sort, and Janie got super pissed off at Cheryl, dumped hot chili over Cheryl's head. And Cheryl had to go to the emergency room and get, a skin graft or emergency care. This was, unfortunately, Leona and Bill Graff also say, this was unfortunately kind of what was going on with Janie at the time. She was very reactive. And she really couldn't handle her emotional outbursts. Also around this time, so because of that, she's taken out of the group home, placed back in the state hospital. Also at this time, her insurance changes, and she suddenly is cut off from her life support, which was Bill Graff, her personal therapist, her personal psychologist. Her whole world is turned upside down. They also think that this could have been a sexual assault because the DA says that is normally the motivation in these types of cases when you have a grown man going after a small or young woman. So they decide they're going to run a background check on the employees because in the 70s, we just let anything fly. Anybody could work at these homes because there was no such thing as a sex offender registry. So no employees were screened when they were hired at Fairview. But they discover nothing really stands out. So the investigators at this point learn about the chili incident with Cheryl. And they're like, okay, so Cheryl has this aggro guy in her life named Ray, who's her boyfriend, who is around the same age, real mad about what happened with the chili. So they bring him in, they put him through all sorts of questioning, they question Cheryl about him. And it turns out they just can't clear him. And the one detective says, we didn't like him. We knew something was up, but we couldn't tie him to this case. So we had to let him go. Now the case goes cold, but Bill Curtis would like to tell us that in a different way. He says, by the mid-'80s, the case goes as cold as the winter wind that blows across Coos Bay. After the break, I'll tell you how they solved this. Hey everyone, stay tuned. Little Miss Recap will be right back after these words. Okay, we're back with the case of Janie Landers, the 18-year-old young woman who walked out of her home at Fairview and has now been missing and found murdered 5 days later. So, that happens in 1979. 10 years later, the case has gone cold, or as cold as the winter wind that blows across Coos Bay. 1989, 10 years later, a tip comes in from some former neighbors of Cheryl and Ray's, and they're like, look, we could hear these two idiots talking through the wall or doing whatever they're doing. It sounds like they murdered somebody. So the police are like, okay, we'll talk to them again. So now they are broken up by this point. So Cheryl and Ray are no longer together. Cheryl decides she's just going to take Ray's truck and drive it right over him because she's telling the police, oh, yeah, he had a gold truck. Now remember, Leona had said that the car was gold, but she said it was a car. This is a truck. Cheryl's like, oh, and also I think I saw an earring in his truck. The detectives are like, this could be our guy because we know Janie was missing an earring when we found her body. So they question Ray and he denies everything. And his truck was destroyed. So they can't look for any evidence. Again, they just can't tie this guy to it. They like him for it, but they can't tie him to it. Once again, the case goes cold. Now, during this time, the next few decades, Joyce, if you remember her from the beginning, Janie's sister, she was raising her 3 little boys. So she's like, I also kind of let the case drop. But I never stopped thinking about it, and I never stopped watching my murder shows because she's, a lady of a certain age by this point. So she decides she's going to go down to the police department in 2015, and she's going to talk to this new detective, Steve Hinkle, and she's asking them, hey guys, I watch Criminal Minds. I know how this works. Can we get some DNA stuff solved here? Hinkle says he was open to it, because he knew that the original evidence was preserved properly and well in this case, and that they could possibly pull something off of it. He says it was a little problematic for him because Fairview had closed. So Fairview closed in 2000 because it was a terrible, terrible place. Again, if you look up institutions around this time, not great. So Fairview closes. I mean, people were treated terribly. They were restrained. They were sterilized against their will. They were given wrong medication. It was bad. So Hinkle says this presents a battle because I can't really, snoop around Fairview. I can't talk to current workers. A lot of people have passed. A lot of people are spread across the United States. Really, the only evidence that he had to look at was the autopsy and the evidence collected from Janie's body when they found her. So he does a deep dive and he starts looking into the autopsy photos. What he realizes is that in the stab wounds, there's no what they call a hilt abrasion. So the hilt is the little part of the knife. It looks like a little shelf that separates the blade and the handle, and it's there to stop your hand from sliding down onto the blade and getting cut. So he figured there might be some of the killer's blood on Janie because their hand was probably cut as they were murdering her. So now they bring in a forensic scientist named Jennifer who specializes in blood pattern. And she collects 4 isolated blood stains that she thought might be transfers from the perpetrator when he lifted her. So she did this really interesting experiment where she figured out where the perpetrator would have put his hands if he had picked up a body and threw it over his shoulder. And they did find blood spots there. So they cut out these 4 samples and they send them away. April 15th, 2016, 37 years after Janie's body is found, the results come back and the suspect is Gerald Dunlap. This is a new name for investigators. This guy has not been on their radar at all. However, they do get a hit through CODIS, the National Database of DNA. Gerald Dunlap had been in Oregon State Prison, and that's how his DNA was in CODIS. He is a convicted sex offender. Get ready to rage about this one, guys. He was sentenced in 1961 to 99 years in prison. Now, I'm bad at math, okay? But I don't think that he served the full 99 years. I'm just going to go out there on a limb and say 1961 plus 99 is not here yet. This was in Tennessee. He was sentenced for the rape of all they say is very young girl. He was paroled, however, in 1973, only 12 years later. Now, the DA does say that in the 70s, it was common for people to get really long sentences and serve very short portions of it. So this is what happened. And this dude drives up to Oregon at some point and he gets a job, guess where? Fairview. And he's working in the laundry room. And apparently everybody at Fairview gets a break at 2:00. And I guess Gerald Dunlap decided he was going to go kidnap and rape someone on his break. He eventually had gotten fired for patting another female worker on the butt. And what had landed him, remember I said earlier his DNA was in CODIS because he was in the Oregon State Prison. What landed him there in the 90s was he sexually assaulted his step-granddaughter. So this guy, the DA's like, this guy is a serial rapist. He is a bad, bad dude. But they want to be super sure. So they get a photo of Dunlap. They do a double-blind photo lineup with Leona from earlier, the woman who drove past. They give her the photo amongst 7 others, and she spots him immediately. So this is our guy. However, he dies in prison in 2002. So Gerald Dunlap is dead. But the case is now officially closed. And the way that this case wraps up is Janie's dad was alive to hear this, but her mom had passed, which was really sad. But Joyce did get justice for her sister. I'm glad that justice for Janie was served. This was a good case. It was an unusual case because it was one in which evidence was properly stored. Hooray. Good job, original detectives. And also, it had some good twists and turns. I'm not going to lie to you. Halfway through, I really thought Chili Can's boyfriend was it. So I was really, surprised at the ending and thought it was a good turn. And I'm very, very, very glad that not only did we get justice for Janie, but that this also helps to shine a light on how people with different abilities were treated in the 70s and 80s. Was not good. Thank you so much for listening to this mini episode. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, let me know and maybe I'll do some more of them. This was just an experiment I'm trying out. If you haven't already, guys, check out our Facebook group. It's called Backdoor Friends. There's a link in the show notes. It's a lot of fun. We're really supportive. We have weekly bang-offs. We talk about current shows that we're watching, movies. We support one another. It's a really great group. There's also merch available. That link is also in the show notes. And finally, if you'd like to become a patron and a supporter of the show and get some bonus content and ad-free content, sign up for our Patreon, Supercast, or Apple subscriptions. Those links are in the show notes as well. As always, guys, thanks for listening. I'll see you soon.